NaMuMyoHoRenGeKyo. Quote, the concept of the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment of life is the most important of all Tendai's principles and the heart and core of the teachings put forward by the Buddha in the course of his lifetime. Hello, everyone. NaMuMyoHoRenGeKyo. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for supporting this resource. Liking, subscribing especially really helps the algorithms, yeah? And those of you who've bought print books from the bookstore, lulu.com/spotlight/Kwun. Also, don't forget the electronic books, the digital books you can download right on threefoldlotus.com at the ebooks page. Got several books available there for very affordable and no shipping, you get them immediately. So if any of you have tried that with success, let me know. I'd like to hear how that is going. All right. Letter from Teradomari. Nichiren's on his way. He's been exiled to Sado Island. He's on his way. They're stopping off before they cross the sea to the island of Sado. And he writes this letter to, I forget who he wrote this to. Oh, gosh. I don't remember his name now. But anyway, he'll probably say it in the letter. Anyway, so it's a moment of reflection, yeah? He's been railing against, well, not against, he's railing to educate the elite, the leaders, the leading families in Japan, which also, as a matter of course, because of their relationship with the spiritual leaders of Japan, the Nembutsu teachers, the Zen, the True Word schools, they've taken over Buddhism in Japan, and they're all practicing esoteric oddities that aren't correct, and Nichiren is endeavoring to correct them, because he sees the way Japan is going and how their practice isn't successful. It isn't doing what it oughta, and that's because they're not practicing correctly. So, nobody likes to be corrected, especially those in power. So, they want to silence him. They want him to go off to a far island and die, just later. And so he's lamenting that. He's lamenting, and he's also using his example of his life as a votary of the Lotus Sutra as withstanding all of these efforts. That even though he's quite righteous about this, right? He's saying, I've read all there is to read about Buddhism, and Shakyamuni is very clear. I don't know why these people can't see it. Well, they can see it. They just choose not to, right? Politics, power, greed. Not unfamiliar to you and I, living in the world today. So, let's read, once again, this letter as it relates to the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment. Because really, even though he's talking about the betrayals and the teachers that won't listen and the way they're persecuting him, he's talking about his own life, his own mind, just like yours and mine, going through this turmoil. Because the speed of thought, there's so many going on in our minds that it'll make your eyes spin, right? You can't keep up. You just glean some of the general inferences of your thoughts, and that motivates you to act or not act, which is also an act. So to be conscious, to be aware of that mechanism, it's very life-affirming. It's very empowering. It's very enlightening. Yeah? So here we go. I've received the string of coins that you sent. Those resolved to seek the way should gather and listen to the contents of this letter. So he's writing a letter. He knows he's going off to exile, where he might very well die. And so he's writing this letter not only to this person who he's received coin, but right away in the first paragraph, thank you for the coins, but make sure you spread this letter around. It's important for all of us in this Sangha to not be, well, first of all, he's going to worry that they're going to be disheartened that their leader, their teacher, is going off to die. He's very aware of that. So it's very compassionate that he wants everyone to read this. And that kind of sets up what we're going to read. So we're going to get a Buddhist lesson here of some exigency because he's off the next day or whatever to Sado Island. This month, the 10th month, on the 10th day, we left the village of Echi in Aiko district of the province of Sagami. Along the way, we stopped at Kumegawa in the province of Musashi, and after traveling for 12 days, arrived here at the harbor of Terradomari in the province of Echigo. From here, we are going to cross the sea to the island province of Sado. But at the moment, the winds are not favorable, so I do not know when we will depart. They're waiting on the weather. The hardships along the way were worse than I could have imagined, and indeed for more than I can put down in writing. Just these 12 days of travels just to here have been quite a gauntlet, okay? I will leave you to surmise what I endured. But I have been prepared for such difficulties from the outset, so there's no point in starting to complain about them now. I shall accordingly say no more on the matter. The 4th volume of the Lotus Sutra states, quote, since hatred and jealousy toward this sutra abound, even when the thus come one is in the world, how much more will this be so after his passing? The 5th volume says, quote, it will face much hostility in the world and be difficult to take resolve in, end quote. And the 38th volume of the Nirvana Sutra states, quote, at that time, all the non-Buddhists spoke to the king, Ajatasattu, saying, quote, O great king, at present there is a man of incomparable wickedness, a monk called Gautama. All sorts of evil people hoping to gain profit and alms, the hypocrisy of this is amazing, have flocked to him and become his followers. These people do not practice goodness, but instead use the power of spells and magic to win over men like Mahakashyapa, Shariputra, and Madhagayayana, end quote. This passage from the Nirvana Sutra recounts the evil words that the various non-Buddhists spoke against Shakyamuni Buddha because he refuted the scriptures preached by their original teachers, the 2 deities and the 3 ascetics. So Nichiren is saying, hey, no, nothing new here. Nothing new to see, right? Emperor's naked. Whenever you confront people's beliefs, what they've invested in, you're going to get flashback, right? You're going to get, what's the word? A backlash, yeah? The irony is that Shakyamuni was trying to teach people how to enlighten themselves. Oh no, we can't do that. That's the province of the elders and the gods and the da-da-da-da-da. See, Buddhism, true Buddhism, confronts that directly. So yeah, I can imagine Shakyamuni was like, what? People, you're saying what, Shakyamuni? The gall, the arrogance. And so they accuse him of people wanting to make money and win fame and profit for themselves following Shakyamuni Buddha. That's so diametrically opposed to what Shakyamuni was teaching, but that's how you appeal to the king, right? He's taking away your power. You're the one who tells us how much money we'll make, right? You come to our homes, you're a cobbler for the rest of your life, so are your children. That's what you can do. Now, give me your tax. Right? And this guy's walking around and people are thinking they're going to profit off it. It's all bullshit, but they can bend the ear of the king because that's something the king is concerned about. Never changes, does it? In the above passages from the Lotus Sutra, however, it is not the Buddha himself who is being looked upon as an enemy. Rather, as Tendai explains, it is the Lotus Sutra that is being opposed. Yeah, it's what he's saying. They're personalizing it with him, but it's what he's saying that is rattling their cage. The various voice hearers and cause awakened ones and the bodhisattvas who seek only the Buddha of recent enlightenment, in other words, persons who show no desire to hear or have confidence in the Lotus Sutra, or who say that it does not match their capacity, though they may not actually slander it in so many words, are all to be regarded as persons of hatred and jealousy. Because they're following the person, not the law. This is a constant theme, right? Observing the situation when the Buddha was in the world and comparing it with the situation since his passing, we may say that the scholars of the various schools in the world today are like the non-Buddhists of the Buddha's time, of Shakyamuni's day. They too speak of a man of incomparable wickedness, Nichiren, by which they mean me, Nichiren. Oh, yeah, I jumped the gun there. They speak of, quote, all sorts of evil people who have flocked to him, you guys, by which they mean my disciples and followers. The non-Buddhists, having incorrectly received and transmitted the teachings of the earlier Buddhas, displayed hostility toward the later Buddha, Shakyamuni. Which makes no sense because there were no Buddhas before there was Shakyamuni. He invented it. The scholars of the various schools today are just the same. In effect, they have let their own way of understanding the Buddha's teachings lead them into erroneous views. Their own way, consciously, right? They are like persons who, dizzy from drink, think that the huge mountain in front of them is spinning round and round. And so we now have these 8 schools, or 10 schools, depending on who you give credit to, all disputing with one another over their various doctrines, and there's magic spells and mudras, hand positions, and blah, blah, blah. The 18th volume of the Nirvana Sutra sets forth the doctrine of the precious jewels that redeem life, end quote. The great teacher Tendai, after studying and pondering this passage, concluded that life, quote unquote, refers to the Lotus Sutra, the NaMuMyoHoRenGeKyo, and the precious jewels, quote unquote, to the first 3 of the 4 teachings expounded in the Nirvana Sutra. But what then of the 4th, or perfect teaching, which the Nirvana Sutra also expounds? This teaching represents a reiteration of the doctrine already expounded in the NaMuMyoHoRenGeKyo, the Lotus Sutra, concerning the eternally inherent Buddha nature, and was preached to lead people to the Lotus Sutra, the NaMuMyoHoRenGeKyo, from which it originated. The Nirvana Sutra's perfect teaching of the eternally inherent Buddha nature, in fact, belongs to the Lotus Sutra. The merits unique to the Nirvana Sutra are consequently limited to the first 3 of the 4 teachings. The 3rd volume of Tendai's profound meaning of the NaMuMyoHoRenGeKyo, of the Lotus Sutra, states, quote, the Nirvana Sutra offers precious jewels to redeem the life of the Lotus Sutra. And thus the hands are clapped and the bargain concluded, end quote. The third volume of the annotations on the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra explains this by saying, quote, "The Tendai school cites this metaphor to indicate that the contents of the Nirvana Sutra are to be regarded as precious jewels." The great teacher Tendai, in his work entitled The Four Meditations, cites the passage in the Lotus Sutra that reads, quote, "Though they," the Buddhas of my imaginations, the personages, the enlightenments of various kinds, "point out various different paths," what I've consistently said, right? "And declares that the four flavors of teachings are also to be regarded as precious jewels. If so, then the sutras that were preached before and after the Lotus Sutra, the NaMuMyoHoRenGeKyo, are all to be regarded as precious jewels offered for the sake of NaMuMyoHoRenGeKyo. But the Buddhist scholars in the world today are of the opinion that this interpretation represents a doctrine put forward by Tendai's school alone, and that none of the other schools accepts it. Well, it's Shakyamuni's teaching. Tendai's just pointing it out. Oh, no, but we can, right? If you want to defeat something, you narrow its parameters, and then you demonize it, right? It's age-old. When I consider the matter, however, I have this to say. This is Nichiren. The 8 or 10 schools we are speaking of all came into existence after the passing of the Buddha and are the creation of the various scholars and teachers of the time. They're not Shakyamuni's teachings. They're the creation of these usurpers, right? But we should not evaluate the sutras that the Buddha preached during his lifetime on the basis of the doctrines of schools established after his passing. In essence, what I was just saying. Right? Whatever Tendai says, Dengyo says, Nichiren says, you have to base their teachings, their doctrines, on the original teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. This is why I'm always reminding us that we don't practice Nichiren Buddhism. Nichiren didn't invent Buddhism, and he doesn't change Buddhism. He reforms the errant streams of other teachers that are not following Shakyamuni's clear path and teachings. Nichiren is reinvigorating and demonstrating the absolute truth, simplicity, and methodology of Shakyamuni. Nichiren is our great bodhisattva, yours and mine. He's showing us through his scholarship, throughout the scholarship of 3,000 years, the consistency, the clarity of Shakyamuni's Lotus teachings. And he's showing us how to enact those teachings clearly, truly, as meant by Shakyamuni. And he's citing previous bodhisattva before him who've done the same thing, like Miao Lo and Dengyo Saicho and Tendai. Right? He goes all the way back and demonstrates these different scholars and how they're pointing out Shakyamuni's teachings, not their own. Right? The judgments put forward by Tendai, however, completely accord with the teachings of all the sutras, you see. It is wrong to discard them on the grounds that they represent no more than the opinions of a single school. They're not. They're insights of that school that accord with Shakyamuni's teachings. There's only one Buddhism. These other schools are something else. This is what Nichiren is saying, and this is what Tendai said, Dengyo said, so on and so forth. The scholars of the various schools continue to cling to the mistaken opinions of their respective teachers, not Shakyamuni, Therefore, they declare that the Buddhist practices must be accommodated to the people's capacities, or they defer to the opinions of their founders, or try to persuade the worthy rulers of the time to be their allies, right? Politics. The upshot of all this is that in the end, they give themselves up wholly to evil intentions. And what do we know about the word evil in the context of Buddhism? They make your mind stray. They take you away from your own awakening, your own enlightenment, and they distract you with baubles and attachments, and exactly not Buddhism. Engage in wrangling and doctrinal disputes and take delight in inflicting injury upon people who are guilty of no fault. You don't agree with me? Ha! You will feel my wrath. Well, who the hell are you to put wrath on anyone? And how is that Buddhism? Dictatorial, authoritarian, right? It's all over the world today. It always has been. Among the various schools, the opinion of the True Word School are particularly distorted. Its founders, Shan Wu Wei and Qing Chang Chi, maintained, quote, "The concept of the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment of life is the most important of all Tendai's principles and the heart and core of the teachings put forward by the Buddha in the course of his lifetime." Correct. But, they say, setting aside this doctrine that the 3,000 realms are encompassed by the mind, which constitutes the foundation of both the exoteric and esoteric teachings, the mudras and mantras from the most crucial part of the Buddhist teachings. How twisted is that? Okay, we'll give credit where credit is due. Tendai is right. This is the most profound of Buddhist teachings. But, from these other magical, mystical teachings, we can say that the hand positions and the different spells and so forth we come up with, that's really the way those teachings take form. That's more important. Some of the esoteric schools, the teachers of the True Word School in later times have used this pronouncement as a pretext to declare that all sutras that do not mention mudras and mantras are to be regarded as inferior, and in fact, as no different from non-Buddhist teachings. Did you just catch that? They honor the Tendai teachings, professing scholarship that Tendai is so right about this core of Shakyamuni's teachings of the 3,000 realms. And in the very next breath, but if the teachings don't include our hand positions and special spells that we give you, they're non-Buddhist. Okay, is it Buddhist or non-Buddhist? Is it Shakyamuni's teachings, or is it a fake Shakyamuni? What are you saying? How does this pablum of words contradict itself so profoundly and nobody questions it? Well, Nichiren was questioning it, obviously. And he's talking to his followers, his disciples, to remember this point as a demonstration of how incredibly corrupt these current movements in Japan, simply not the words of Shakyamuni. But even though they invoke the words of Shakyamuni, they, in the very next breath, toss them aside like they're not even Buddhism. How can you even that in your mind, yeah? It's so blindingly obvious how corrupt they are. And why would Nichiren be doing this in this letter? The very real possibility he may not make it. So he wants to imbue his disciples and his members, you and I, with the strength of conviction that Shakyamuni is correct, Tendai is correct, Dengyo is correct, Nichiren is correct. We are practicing correctly. You want to have that confidence so that when you chant NaMuMyoHoRenGeKyo, you have that depth of conviction, confidence, knowing that this is the instantiation of Buddhahood. Where are we time-wise? We'll go a little further. Some of the esoteric teachers assert that the Mahavajracana Sutra was preached by the thus come one Mahavajracana, a made-up character of Shakyamuni's. Okay. A Buddha other than the thus come one Shakyamuni wouldn't exist if it weren't for the teachings of Shakyamuni. Drives me mad. Others declare that it is the highest of all the teachings put forth by the Lord of teachings, Shakyamuni Buddha. While still others say that the same Buddha manifested himself once in the form of Shakyamuni Buddha to preach the exoteric sutras, and on another occasion in the form of the thus come one Mahavajracana to preach the esoteric sutras. How twisted can stories become over time? Right? I make up in a story I tell you, I make up some characters, Judy and John. And somehow, hundreds of years later, people are saying, well, this is the teaching of Judy and John. Sylvain he was a provisional teacher. We follow Julie and John. Well, Judy and John aren't real. They're examples. We see it all the time in Buddhism, yeah? That's crazy. Okay. Thus, misunderstanding the underlying principles of Buddhism, they produce an endless array of erroneous opinions. Because John wouldn't wear that. If your name is John, please don't take this personally. They were like a group of people who, unaware of the true color of milk, venture various speculations as to what the color of milk might be, though none are able to surmise it correctly, because they've never seen the milk, yeah? Or they are like the blind men in the parable who try to guess the true shape of an elephant. That's an ancient story, right? One touches the trunk and guesses the elephant to be a snake, like a snake. The other one, the tail, the other one in the middle. They all have different impressions of what an elephant is. In this connection, the scholars of the various schools should understand that the Mahavajracana Sutra, if preached before the Lotus Sutra, is on a level with the Flower Garland Sutra, and if preached after the Lotus Sutra, is on the level of the Nirvana Sutra. Again, referencing that statement he often quotes in the Immeasurable Meanings Sutra and in the beginning of the Lotus Sutra. For these 40 or more years, I have preached this, that, but I have not preached the truth. I have not taught the truth. I am now, with this one vehicle, Lotus teachings, going to teach the one true vehicle, right? Nothing I taught before or after this sutra. That's what he's referencing. Is it not possible that the Lotus Sutra in India contained descriptions of mudras and mantras, but that those who translated the text into Chinese omitted those sections? Kumarajiva calling his version of the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law? And is it also not possible that Shan Wu Wei added mudras and mantras and called his version the Mahavajracana Sutra? Oh yeah, we've read about how they customized their own script, right? What was that guy's name before Shan Wu Wei? I don't remember his name. For example, there were other versions of the Lotus Sutra I've talked about on this channel, right? Such as the Lotus Sutra of the Correct Law, the Supplemented Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law, the Lotus Meditation Sutra, and the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra. I talk about that in my Lotus lectures. If you go to that playlist, you can follow along with every single chapter from different translations of the Lotus Sutra. In India, after the Buddha's passing, Bodhisattva Nagarjuna was the one who truly understood the relationship between the Lotus Sutra and the other sutras, while in China, the great teacher Tendai, Chi-Che, was the first to grasp it correctly many hundreds of years later. Men like Shanwu Wei of the True Word School, Cheng Quan of the Flower Garland School, Che Xiang of the Three Treatises School, and Zhu En of the Dharma Characteristic Schools each publicly upheld the doctrines of the schools they had established, but in their hearts, they were all won over to the teachings of the Tendai school. Yet their disciples were ignorant of this fact and hence developed erroneous opinions. How can they avoid being guilty of slandering the correct teaching? We'll continue in the next video. I think you can see in this letter that Nichiren is making a very strong appeal to his followers, you and I. Don't be dissuaded. Just because there are clever politicians out there who would have us stray from our self-realization, don't let them in. Have conviction. Have strength of your conviction, your knowledge. With every daimoku, you build the muscles of your Buddhahood, yes? It's training for a samsaric mind that is easily distracted. Don't get distracted. Stay your conviction. Okay? And for that, I'm incredibly proud. I admire your practice. I try with these resources and everything that I do and say to pay homage to your practice. Thank you. Like, subscribe, support in any way you can. Right? Ebooks, publications, Patreon, direct to PayPal, whatever you can do. Let's keep this resource available and grow the Sangha so that more and more people have access to it. NaMuMyoHoRenGeKyo. Thank you once again for listening, for being here, for your practice. And in that regard, please take care of your health and keep your practice strong and regular, yes? I sound like a physician. Anyway, once again, I'll see you next time, okay? Bye for now.